Good afternoon and welcome to CG Techs, powered by the Virtulab weekly webinar. Just a quick reminder, as I do every week, Wednesday, 12:30 UK time, and we will not keep you for any longer than 30 minutes. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube. Again, set a reminder, we always want feedback, we always want questions, so please fire them in at the start of the show or afterwards, and the link will be live about 5 or 6 hours on YouTube. I am really excited, before I introduce two guests today, really excited for this. This started around 70 days ago, but COVID, as well as messing up the entire planet, has messed up our plans to have you guys on. We have selected WWF as our charity of the year. For those who know me, I'm extremely keen on conservation. It's something I'm very passionate about and talk a lot about. In fact, Louise made me go vegan to just have you guys on the website. I'm not sure say that. So again, it's something I'm really passionate about. We've wanted to have you guys on for quite a while, and we've managed to get you on. What is interesting as well, we are very much innovation, R&D, and tech company. And so the theme of today, quite interestingly, is not just about WWF conservation, but it's conservation technology, which David's going to talk about. So first, maybe I could do, or have you guys just quickly introduce yourselves. Louise?
Yeah, I'll go first because I'm the slightly more boring one, who isn't going to be talking for the majority of today. But I'm Louise. I work in the community and events team at WWF. And we've been working with Dave and the Virtulab, who generously contacted us to let us know that they'd like to choose us as their charity of the year. And we'll be working with them throughout the year to come up with lots of exciting activities for staff and events. In fact, after this, I'll probably be talking to Dave about an event called the Big Winter Wander that we've just launched, which is a sponsored walk. It's great for getting members of staff outside in terms of mental well-being, but it's really good for getting out to reconnect with nature, as well as raising funds for the cause. So we're really excited to support Virtulab with all the activities that they've got going on in the year. And if you'd like to learn more about the opportunities available, you can visit our website to hear more, or by all means reach out on LinkedIn or chat to Dave.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louise. And David, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's David. I'm the Head of Conservation Intelligence at WWF, which is a GIS remote sensing team. And hopefully today I get to tell you a little bit about what we do.
Brilliant. And before we come to David to go over some of the slides, Louise, I guess I want to tell everyone that on our website, virtulab.com, you can go there and there is a Just Give page for WWF set up. You also mentioned how to get in touch with you guys. So have you got anything else you want to cover before we go across to David in terms of getting people active?
Yeah, I might as well plug a couple of bits, shouldn't I? So there's lots of ways that businesses can get involved with WWF, from partnerships to charity of the year opportunities and wider staff engagement. And they're all on our website, wwf.org.uk. But in terms of the opportunities and what we're going to be working with the Virtulab on, there's loads of events and activities. Unfortunately, a couple of them, such as marathons, are on hold because of COVID. But there's lots of other ways to be creative and fundraise. And we're willing to work with lots of businesses and their staff on ideas that they come up with. So.
Excellent. I'm still interested to how many people are going to log in today of an era of myself wondering if Hulk Hogan's going to be on board. So someone can maybe explain the name change later on to us. David, over to you. I'll bring up your slides if you wish.
Can you see them okay?
I can indeed, yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So
if you just full screen, David, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Then, perfect.
Cool. Perfect. So I'm going to talk about what we do at WWF with GIS and remote sensing. So I'll give you a little bit of background of where we came from. We've been working at this for about 5 years now. And then I'm going to go through and talk about the various techniques we're doing, some of the innovation in there, and I'll talk about how the FIs, how the financial industry are really kind of getting involved and interested in this space now from a different angle than us, but using similar techniques which we've developed. So the first thing I want to talk about is we built this viewer 5 years ago, and we've been developing it since. It's an Esri. It uses a lot of Esri technology. It's got a lot of custom code in it now. And what we were interested in doing was trying to understand at a global scale how conservation assets were changing and being impacted. So how were they being impacted by natural events, things like fires, wildfires, or flooding or other things, but also how were they being impacted by human developments, so new mines, new roads, new infrastructure. We're particularly interested in that because it's very important to engage early on in the life cycle of a new major development, a new mine, a new road. You have to, if you're going to have positive impact, ideally engage very early on in the project life cycle. So it's no good engaging once they've already committed millions to the project, they've got bulldozers on the ground. Ideally, you want to be engaging whilst they're still at the concession stage, they're still at the planning stage. So we started to try and get as much data as possible of what people were doing around the world and putting it into this platform. So quite quickly, things get quite complex. So what sets us apart is we acquire a lot of commercial data. So this is still just all on the GIS side, but this is showing you all the little green squares are protected areas. There's about 250,000 of them. And then all the dots and circles are various assets, these are mining projects and oil and gas wells. So we keep we try and at all times keep as much data on these assets as possible. So we want to know who owns them, what they're doing, what specific types they are to sector. So, if it's mining, what commodities they are, what development stage they're in, who the royalty holders are, any extra information we can. We try to keep the portfolio of data on what people are doing as big as possible. Unfortunately, there are some areas of some sectors where there just isn't data yet. So agriculture is a big hole we have and one we're trying to fill. But we have, I think, as about as good as coverage as you can get nowadays. As I said, we try and keep the attributes up. So this is zooming in a little bit. So this is showing you some protected areas in Guinea, and this is showing you some of the mining assets in the area. So all these yellow squares are concessions, which have been granted. The grey ones are concessions which are under application. And then all these little dots are active and inactive mines. So just from a simple, straightforward point of view, if you were in Guinea and you were trying to understand what pressures were on your protected area from a mining point of view, you can come into our platform and you can quickly see that data all together. You can also see, what future roads are being planned, what power plants are there, these other pressures you might be interested in. And that's very useful because you have to understand in some places of the world, getting hold of this information is very problematic. You'd have to go down to the government ministry, you'd have to sit around for 4 hours probably, and then you'd have to come back and integrate it all yourself. We update site every month where the data is available. So we're constantly trying to keep site as up to date as possible. The other thing we've started to do now is integrate other data sources. So this is just at a very simple level. You can pull Sentinel-2 or Landsat tiles, so you can start to look at imagery of the specific site you're looking at, from 4 days ago, all the way back to the 80s for the full archives. We also have time-lapse satellite imagery in here, so you can quickly play a little video, and it will show you kind of mosaic of time-lapse satellite imagery from the 80s to present, so you can see how sites have evolved at low resolution. So I've talked a little bit about our data structure. So the first one I talked about was GIS, which should be quite straightforward for everyone to understand. This versus that overlaps. And I've talked a little bit about how we use remote sensing. So people visually just check stuff in site all the time, but we're also using remote sensing products, like forest loss, land use change, which come into our GIS. We just analyze them and crunch them using GIS. And then we have a new piece of work we're working on at the moment, which is about news APIs, where we're using machine learning with the Alan Turing Institute to look at millions of articles coming through Google's News API or GDEL or some other source, and then using machine learning to read out any names we're aware of, so protected area names like Yellowstone National Park or National Park or protected area, and then threat words like mining, illegal mining, fire, wildfire, and then geolocating those stories onto the map. And then we have this other news source coming in to help us keep track of areas of news we might not otherwise have. So we've tested this, and we're going into the next stage of development. So already it's helped us find out about things we would have missed otherwise, such as illegal avocado farming in Mexico, as one example. So that's what we're up to, and we've been doing this for about the last 5 years. About 3 years ago, we started to get a lot of phone calls from, particularly in the insurance industry and the reinsurers, and that branched out into other types of the financial industry, investors, and even into sovereign debt, where they were interested in not particularly how conservation assets were doing, but they were interested in what companies were doing. So with our data and our approaches, they wanted to basically look at the question from a different side of view. So it's the same data, just cut a different way. So if we take mining example, here I pulled out all of Rio Tinto's mines, which they primarily own, and then we can run assessments on these. And we can say, well, how well is Rio Tinto doing versus another mining company? Who's operating in more protected areas? Who's got higher water risk around them? And then we can start to bring in remote sensing on top of that as well. And indeed, the news feeds, if we have it available. So this has developed over the last 3 years, and about 12 months ago, the word spatial finance started to be kind of mainstreamed. And I think it is now the emerging field of spatial finance. So it's where we take an asset. So we ID all the assets of a company, and then we're trying to give a context to those assets through observational data. So in the financial world, this is called ESG, so environmental, social, and governance reporting, and it gives a different lens to the traditional world of ESG, which the financial community have been using so far. So far, ESG has primarily been coming from the companies themselves, their own reporting, or it's been from web scraped media, where they've been looking at the PR, what people are saying about their company. So this is kind of independent and a new approach. It obviously relies on you having all the asset data for the company you're looking at, or companies, which is problematic for some industries. And then there are issues around supply chains, which need to be worked out. The scale of these issues is huge. I don't mean to diminish them, but it's exciting already what you can do with the information which is out there. One thing which is interesting to think about is the different ways that this data can be cut and looked at for different applications in the financial industry. So there's so much potential data you could be pulling into this. We've begun to look at this framework to help us understand things. So at tier 4, the bottom tier, we have sub-asset level data. This is things like smart meters on the side of the factory, which are telling you minute by minute what their air quality is, or their power use is, or their water use is. A lot of this data exists, and the company use it themselves, but there's a lot of legal issues around getting hold of that data. Hitachi have a really interesting project now where they're trying to use this data to evidence green bonds, why some companies are good, and why you should finance various green projects. The next level up is looking at individual assets, so looking at individual mines, individual factories, individual real estate, and that can be using remote sensing techniques. It could be GIS overlaps, as I've already explained. Are they in a protected area? Are they not? It's really high level stuff, but it helps to give you context to are they operating in a World Heritage site or not? Does that company have any assets close to deforestation? And then summing that data at the other 2 tiers. So you can take all the assets of a company and sum them together in any ways you want, depending on how you want to look at the data. And then you can come up with a company score. And the same for portfolio, right? So you can take a bunch of companies and all the companies in a portfolio and understand, if any have any red flags against them. It's got a long way to go. I think we've seen commercial tools being developed at tier 3 and some stuff coming out at tier 2 for certain sectors. But there's a lot of sectors and particularly supply chains need to be worked out before we go too far. There is this kind of exciting world of new remote sensing stuff coming out, which is going to be really helpful both to us and to the world of spatial finance. So this is a company called Bluefield Technologies. There's a couple of them now which do methane detection, and it won't be long until we move to daily or weekly methane detection for the whole globe. If you know where all the oil and gas assets are around the world, and you have this information about daily methane releases, or oil spills is another one which has come out, you can link these back to the assets, and you can have a far better understanding of what companies are doing, and therefore much greater accountability and transparency, which is great for us and great for the financial community who are trying to get a handle on this. So just to give you an insight of kind of where we are now, we run every quarter global assessments for 2,500 global assessments. So we take one asset and compare it against 50 different things. So if we take mining projects globally, we'll compare that against 50 different things. And then, we'll do roads, rail, power plants, different types of power plants, shipping, etc., against 50 other different variables. That gives us a GIS data set, which we dashboard. And then we can add in any other remote sensing products, which we tend to work with externals like Bluefield Technologies in these spaces. We don't have the capacity, unfortunately, and we never will. We're not a world-leading remote sensing company, obviously. So we tend to bring in this kind of expertise. So oil spills is one we've been looking at, and the other thing we've been looking at is a lot of stuff around ASI data for shipping and fishing. So within the financial community, as I mentioned, this is really an exciting way of getting around some of the current limitations in ESG. So if you're relying on the company themselves to tell you what they're up to, there's obviously problems with that. They can bias reports, forget to report some of the fines they may have had, and be a little bit favorable on themselves. The other issue with it is it's very slow. They tend to report once a year, maybe in a PDF document, and they use different methodologies to each other. And there might be a 6-month lag time by the time that report comes out. So if you're relying on a report which is 6 months out of date, and then they come out every 12 months, it's not great for your insight. So you can obviously see how exciting it is and how interesting it is to have this kind of daily updates or weekly updates on, if have they been involved in an oil spill or not. The other areas of this, natural language processing or web scraping or machine learning, clever machine learning of media to try and understand what a company is up to, is great. But again, it has limitations in that only the bigger names and the bigger issues tend to be reported, right? There are hundreds of oil spills every day or every week. We know this from the remote sensing. But most are minor, produced by small companies. They're not newsworthy. They don't make the news. It's only the bigger ones which do. So it's this consistency of being able to check the whole globe, which is really exciting and really important. So because of all of this, because we know that satellites aren't going away, they're getting cheaper every year, the technology is getting better, the resolution's getting better, the things we can do with it are getting better. We fully expect the world of spatial finance to increase. We've been talking now to Bloomberg, Refinitiv, S&P Global, all the major business intelligence providers, and most have a work stream on this. Bloomberg recently integrated fires into its mapping system, so you can tell in real, I think within a 48-hour delay, if wildfires are going to affect specific assets on the ground. They already do this for weather, so extreme weather events. You can tell if a hurricane's going to come up and affect that local factory. So they're beginning to pick up on it, but hopefully we'll start to see good deliverables in the next 2 to 3 years. But there's also an incredibly important role the nonprofits need to play in this space as holders of the climate models and a lot of the environmental data. We need to have quite a strong dialogue with the FIs and the business intelligence providers to make sure that whenever they want to look at climate or environmental observation data to look against these assets with, they're using the best data they can, and they're using the data in the right way. So particularly within the climate space, we see data being applied in the wrong way. which is not the financial industry's fault. It's the huge complexities in understanding that data. And so I think from my perspective and looking forward to my role over the next 3 to 4 years, it's going to be a lot of helping this dialogue and conversation and making sure they're using the right data to understand what biodiversity is and how it might have an impact. So to give you just one example of how challenging this is and how much scope there is for potential applications and innovation in the space, this is the Belt and Road Initiative, which we recently geolocated. So this is the Chinese government's huge infrastructure project, 68 different countries, trillions of dollars. We've mapped 2,500 projects. So on this map, you can see part of the BRI. The lines are linear infrastructure, so things like roads, rail, power lines, fiber optic cables. The dots are things like factories, mines, real estate. And some of these projects have already built, some of them are in process, some of them are never probably going to be built for one reason or another. And so we're now trying to assess what is the high-level environmental impacts of this, what are the climate implications of this, what remote sensing techniques could we apply to this to get further insights, etc. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now and move over to any questions you guys might have. But hopefully that gives you just a little bit of an idea of the kind of the breadth of work we do and its relevance to the financial industry.
I've got so many. I'm slightly annoyed we've only got 8 minutes.
Sorry.
No. I've stuck up for people to fire the questions in. Okay, I'll ask you the first one, and you may not know. How many bits of information or feeds, APIs, are coming into that database?
I don't know. Not too many. We try to ingest data ourselves and put it on our server, but there's a few. I don't know.
You talk about remote sensing then. How do people get involved? So, for example, dozens of universities around the world have remote sensing capabilities. Lots of companies have it. How do people offer that data to you, or are you trying much more to pull the data?
So if the data is ready to go, like it's processed and they've got a thing and they want to give it, share, we can obviously acquire that commercially. We can buy it off you, or we can set up a collaboration. What we do tend to do, if it's more researchy and it's more like, hey, we've got this cool idea, we want to explore this. We want to see how it works against your data. We set up MOUs with specific research groups. We have a few with universities right now, and we basically set up a project and we work on that project together.
Okay. And you mentioned climate change. So obviously it's the obvious one for all of us. When we start talking about these huge projects and the change of the world, we talk about the climate. Is there mapping and modeling? I mean, obviously there's climate modeling, and particularly on Esri, I'm familiar with Esri software, but is that something you correlate together? So, whether it's to see the implication of what's been happening with these oil fields, or actually this weather will affect the methane spread, et cetera, is that the kind of thing you're compiling together?
So, no, we're kind of interested in how is it going to affect protected areas, how is it going to affect nature. Companies like insurers and FIs are far more interested in how is it going to affect my asset. Is the asset still going to be able to produce? Is there going to be a material risk to that asset in the future? So there's slightly different lenses, and we tend to work with universities and experts on climate data because it's an incredibly tricky field, and different models can be applied in different ways, and you can get away with some stuff you might not need to backfill or get so into it, or depending on what your task is.
And I guess you talk about then the environment. So obviously you're looking at specific areas being impeded on. Do you track, or is someone then tracking the implication of that on the wildlife in those areas?
Well, yeah. So we're trying to give oversight to people on the ground, right? So let's say, I was a field conservation in New Zealand for 7 years. You're working on your projects in your space. You go out every week, you're working on that. That's what you're doing. You have no idea that company X from overseas is planning to put a mine in your project area or a road through it. You're busy doing your thing. So we're trying to give people, hey, by the way, there's this thing coming along, you might now need to engage with this or be aware of this. So it's that kind of early warning oversight to people, local offices around, obviously WWF offices all over the world, and trying to give them that information in a timely way. A big one is the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. No one really knows where those sites are going, what they're doing. And so to give people that heads up is a big thing. We ourselves, we might then go and engage with the financial community, the banks behind those projects, or the companies involved, if we can reach them. Yeah.
Okay. And actually, I'll open this up to Louise as well. WWF always asks for charity donations, but what can individuals, such as myself or anyone watching, what can we do to help WWF outside of donations predominantly?
Yeah, so I don't mind picking this up. So there's a lot, and I think it doesn't have to be an all-in or nothing. So I think everyone can make lots of small changes. Something we do for Earth Hour each year is, for the couple of previous years that we've done it, we've introduced pledges or promises, and they're quite achievable small actions that might not be a huge change in an individual's lifestyle, but rolled up as a community, as a nation, as a country, as a globe, they'll start to have bigger impacts. So whether that's, you've probably heard it all before, use a reusable shopping bag or water bottle, turn your washing down to 30. If you're buying a new car, make it electric. As you've been talking about yourself, like if you can switch to a more vegetable-based, plant-based diet, even if it's not the whole time, if it's just for a couple of meals, like a meatless Monday was a thing for a while, all of those kind of individual actions by a group of people will start having an impact at a bigger scale. Because it can feel quite, I don't know if you feel this, that there is such thing as eco-anxiety. And I think a lot of people can sometimes feel quite overwhelmed with negative news stories, etc. But there is a lot that can be done on an individual basis, and it's not all doom and gloom. Like, there are solutions and there are ways forward. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, just start with a reusable water bottle and take it from there, really.
And again, I'll get in trouble now. Are we allowed to talk about certain television shows that can be watched?
Oh, yeah. So we've got, so we do have, hopefully everyone's kind of seen it or seen the ads. There's a Netflix documentary called David Attenborough, Life on Our Planet. That's out at the minute, and is a beautiful story with incredible footage and kind of filming, both from WWF and Silverback. But it also talks a lot about some of the issues that we face, but then the solutions that we can take forward as well. I mean, there's so many documentaries and films out there. So just by engaging in any of them and taking notice and action then off the back of it is just a really important step.
It's the COVID Netflix documentary watch. There are
yeah, while you can't go out, just sit in your jammies and get some on.
Good. Louise, David, I want to thank you both. Again, I've sort of stressed since we started talking that this is really passionate to me, and I hope it comes across on the webinar that we're desperately keen to help. I can't stress enough, if you haven't been on our website and donated some money for WWF, then please do so. So thank you very much for coming on.
Cool. Thanks very much, Dave.
No problem. And for everyone else, please stay tuned. There'll be a post going out for next week's webinar. We've got Pascal Bonnet, who had to cancel on us a few weeks ago looking at innovation, just released a book. Really interesting character. You can find him on LinkedIn. So set a reminder, come and watch. And again, we're all